everyone, and welcome to today's session on the future of education with some amazing experts in the field. The majority of education systems are still based on the same principles as when they were created over 100 years ago. However, the world has changed and continues to evolve. We need transformation of our education system to best prepare future generations to meet these challenges. In this session, we will be discovering how. First up, we'll be hearing from Sophie Howe. She is the first person in the world to have a government position that represents future generations. Sophie was appointed the first Future Generations Commissioner for Wales in February 2016. Her role is to act as a guardian for future generations in Wales and to support public bodies working towards well-being goals. Prior to this, Sophie was the first Deputy Police and Crime Commissioner for South Wales and the only woman in the Police Commissioner leadership role in Wales. Welcome, Sophie, to the stage.
Good morning. It's my pleasure to be with you as the world's first Future Generations Commissioner. It's quite a lonely place being a world first and an only, but hopefully before long I'll be joined with friends from many countries because let's be honest, the way in which we think about the future, the way in which we plan for the future and the way in which our countries operate to protect the interests of future generations is fundamentally broken. And I'll talk a little bit about that in terms of education today. Oh, hang on. Right. There we go. You got them. So how many, oh, dear me. How many of these logos or these companies do you think that you could name? I reckon most of you could have a pretty good stab at most of those. And what about these Pokemon characters? Maybe a little bit more difficult, but I reckon you could still have a pretty good guess at this. What about these? What about nature? What about the birds? And what about these leaves? Well, actually, when we look at the way in which we're educating our children, it's a pretty big problem because children in the US could name 1,000 company logos, but only 10 plants. Children in the UK age 8 are substantially better at naming Pokemon characters. 80% can name Pokemon characters, only 50% can actually name real species. 83% of UK children don't know or couldn't identify a bumblebee. 1,000 children showed native plants, only 82% could not identify what an oak leaf looked like. And this is the way that we're educating our children. Arguably, this has got a huge connection to the way in which we view life, where everything is based on consumerism, on profit, on gain, when actually, as the UN says, the little things that actually provide the foundations of our planet, nature, biodiversity, are being lost at scale. And so there's a huge need for us to transform the way we educate our children. But there's also a need for us to educate the entire system that we operate within, which is endemically short-term. If you think about the way our system operates, short-term political cycles, short-term budget cycles, all of those things, is it a wonder why we're in the predicament we're in with the climate crisis, with increasing inequality and so on? But actually, there's a neuroscience reason for this, because our brains are hardwired to ignore the future. When we think about our future selves, the brain patterns actually almost work as if we're thinking about someone else, if we're thinking about something which is disconnected to ourselves. And that's perhaps why we disconnect our actions, our decisions today, from how they may affect the future. And that's the fundamental problem with government and governance. But what if we were legally required to join the dots? We were legally required to consider the long-term well-being of people and planet. Well, that's exactly what the legal requirement is in Wales. Our groundbreaking Wellbeing of Future Generations Act passed in 2015, the first country in the world to legislate to protect the interests of future generations. with all 44 of our main institutions, our local authorities, our councils, our health boards, our public health agencies, our environment agencies, and significantly the Welsh Government and Welsh ministers themselves must demonstrate how they are acting in a way which seeks to ensure that the needs of the present are met without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their own needs. It also sets out 7 long-term wellbeing goals for Wales. These were devised in a conversation with the citizens of Wales, which posed the question, what is the Wales you want to leave behind to your children, your grandchildren, and future generations to come? And these were aligned with the UN SDGs, and if you look at these 7 wellbeing goals, every one of our 44 institutions has a legal duty to set objectives which maximise their contribution to all 7 of these wellbeing goals. So that means that every institution has to work beyond their traditional boundaries. So the economy department in government is asking, how can we contribute to health? The Natural Resources Department is asking, how can we contribute to the economy in a way which doesn't damage the environment? Our health system is asking, what about our own carbon emissions? What about the fact that if we were a country, as a health sector, we would be the 5th biggest emitter in the world? All of these things are connected. And let me just pull out the one goal here of a prosperous Wales, a productive, innovative, low-carbon society, one which uses resources efficiently and proportionately, including acting on climate change, one which focuses on a well-educated population with the skills to enable them to access decent work. Okay, not a catchy definition, but pull out our definition of prosperity. Can anyone see GDP written in there? What we are moving towards in Wales is a well-being economy, one which puts the planet and our resilience on the same footing as economic growth. And that is the way that the entire world needs to change. And then 5 ways of working within our legislation. The minister who passed this legislation described it as the Common Sense Act. And why is that? Because these principles of decision-making are intrinsically common sense. You must plan for the long term. You must think of the long-term consequences of the things that you do. You must prevent problems from occurring or from getting worse. You must integrate your thinking to recognize the connections between each of these goals. You must collaborate and work together because no one institution, sector, organisation can solve the world's problems on their own. And you must involve citizens, understand how your actions are affecting them, understand the lived experiences of citizens when you're setting policy. So why has Wales legislated for common sense? Because sadly, common sense is not that common in the way that we do decision-making across the world. And how does it play into our education system? Well, some experts suggest that 65% of children who are entering primary school today will go on to do jobs which do not currently exist. And we know that our education systems are outdated. Here, nearly 50% of subject knowledge acquired during the first year of a 4-year technical degree is outdated by the time students graduate. Only 50% of students surveyed thought that their secondary studies improved their employment opportunities. So what is this system we've created? One which tends to be static, one which is not keeping up with the pace of change, one which perhaps educates you for another pointless job rather than a life well lived, rather than being an ethical and informed citizen, perhaps being recognizing that we need to shift beyond that because we are not just global consumers, we are global citizens. And if we look again at the future of education and how we're doing things at the moment, I don't know if any of you have used the 3 horizons methodology to consider the future. Horizon 1, it's where we're going. If we continue with an education system which is not fit for purpose, not fundamentally based around the skills that will be needed in the future, which is not the regurgitation of knowledge, it's about teamwork, it's about empathy, it's about collaboration, it's about critical thinking, it's about creativity, and it's about thinking about how we can collectively solve the world's problems. But if we continue to follow Horizon 1, we're going on that downwards trail. Horizon 2, where we have innovations, where we think about things that maybe how we can just do things better. How can we automate things? How can we make the same things that we do now just faster and quicker and so on. Except the problem with that Horizon 2 is it just takes us back to the old normal. It takes us back to consumerism. It takes us back to making more things, selling more things, damaging the planet in the meanwhile. So Horizon 3 is where we want to be, where we're educating our young people, our children, and indeed for lifelong learning across the life course, for people to be focused on a new economic model. One which acts within planetary boundaries, one which is restorative, where people have the skills, the capacity, and the mindset to focus on those things. And so what are we doing in Wales? Well, our Wellbeing of Future Generations Act, and my role as an independent commissioner, so I sit outside of government and I hold government to account, and I ask them to justify to me how the way in which they're developing policy is accounting for and planning for the future and applying the Wellbeing of Future Generations Act. And I've challenged them on how they're doing that in our education system. So we have a new curriculum in Wales. I like to call it less Latin and more life. That's actually a bit of a dig to England, who are our neighbours, because in England there's a lot of Latin and not much life in their curriculum. But in Wales, the purposes of our curriculum, 4 purposes: healthy and confident individuals, ethical and informed citizens, enterprising and creative contributors, ambitious and capable learners. And embedded throughout our curriculum are requirements around understanding how our world works, understanding how our environment is connected to everything. So every school has an eco-council. Schools are learning how to grow food, how to make sure that they're addressing food poverty in areas through the food that they've grown. We are looking at the reforms to our examination system, so our new qualifications will focus on the same things as well, and we are helping to equip our young people to be those global citizens. We are also focusing on educating for equality. Wales is the first country in the UK to have Black history as part of its curriculum, along with those requirements on environment and on a focus on health and mental well-being for children. And post-pandemic, where we saw other countries have catch-up on maths, on English, on the 3 Rs, as we describe it, reading, writing, and arithmetic. In Wales, our catch-up programmes were based around creativity. They were based around programmes in nature. They were based around programmes in music. They were focused on the physical and mental well-being of children, because those are the things that are going to be absolutely crucial for those children to have a life well lived. And we must make the connections between education and inequality, because even in the global north, we know that actually there are a huge number of opportunities in our green economy, for example. If we're going to meet the challenges of a low-carbon economy, we need the skills. We don't have the skills at the moment. We have a huge skills gap in things like renewable energy technology, in things like electric vehicle infrastructure, in retrofitting energy efficiency measures in homes. And so we have a huge opportunity to fill those skills gaps. But if we don't do that by connecting the dots and working out that actually we need purposeful and targeted interventions to make sure that women are coming into those industries, that Black, Asian, minority, ethnic communities are coming into those industries, there is a chance that we actually end up widening the inequality gap whilst trying to fix a problem around our green economy. So absolutely crucial that we start thinking about that. Just some examples of the things that we're doing in Wales as a result of our new curriculum, looking at how food is procured in the school canteen to focus on producing local food. Our young people who receive milk every day as part of the school day are challenging why the milk is arriving in cartons and not reusable bottles. And so working to challenge, using the Future Generations Act, the system which does that, the local authority which procures it in that way. They are creating sites for nature on schools. All of our schools, the new schools built in Wales, will be zero carbon schools. And so I genuinely believe that what we're doing here in Wales is groundbreaking. The next thing that we'll do is to reform the examination system, because I think that when we're testing children just to regurgitate knowledge in a narrow way, then actually we're just perpetuating a system of old. So I think Wales is a country to watch. We've already been groundbreaking in the legislation that we've produced, and we intend to take this to the rest of the world. Just a few months ago, the United Nations Secretary General said in his Common Agenda framework that he wanted to have a declaration on future generations at a UN level, that he wanted a future generations special envoy, and that he wanted reforms to the UN governance infrastructure. And that has the potential to trickle down to the 193 countries across the UN. So if you ever think that you're too small, Wales is a country of just over 3 million people. If you ever think that you're too small to make a change, look at what Wales is doing, tiny little Wales influencing the rest of the world. And we need to influence the rest of the world because every country in the world needs to be acting in the interests of future generations. Thank you.
Thank you, Sophie, for that highly informative speech. And as someone who did a Latin A-level that was entirely pointless, I am very on board with your vision for the future. Next up, we are going to have a discussion about the future of education with two experts in the field. I'd like to welcome Harry Waters and François Taddei to the stage. Harry Waters has been part of the TFL world for over 14 years. He is a trainer for Pearson and BBC Live Classes project. He's also the learning guide for BBC Studios project Speak Out for Sustainability. Harry's passion for teaching and sustainability led him to create Renewable English, an online English course providing free classes and materials aimed at raising climate change awareness across the globe. François Taddei is the founder and president of the Learning Planet Institute. He's also a renowned researcher in learning science and evolutionary systems biology and directs the Challenges Research Institute. François advocates for large-scale collaboration to build a learning planet and the development of learning communities that work together to find sustainable solutions for education and health sectors. Thank you both for joining me on stage. As a starting point, I'd love to hear about your personal ethos and mission in the space of education, if you could tell me a little bit about that.
Thank you very much. My personal ethos, well, first of all, I'd like to thank Sophie, because my nieces are both Welsh, so that's brilliant for them. My personal ethos is you need to understand what your students want, what your students need before you can help them develop in any way whatsoever. So first and foremost, we need to listen to our students, need to listen to what they have to say before we can make any kind of decision on what we're going to teach them. I don't believe it's up to us to impose our ideals on them. It's up to us to listen to what they want, what they need to move forward in a way that's beneficial to them and to the planet.
Fully agreed. I think that they have to learn to care for oneself, other, and the planet. I think that they have to learn to cooperate to do this rather than compete just to pass exams. I think that they have to learn to become, I would say, fractal citizens, citizens of the planet, in a way that no children is today. There is no kid that has the right to vote. Okay, so we have to empower them and create the first planetizen, the citizens of the planet. I think that, and we have to define this with them. We have to co-construct their future with them. We have to empower them, listen to them, and be at their service.
Interesting. Through your personal work, what change are you hoping to bring about?
Me personally, I teach in the English language area sector. So we all know, rightly or wrongly, English is the global lingua franca. We can see here, we're in Paris, we're all speaking English. Everybody can understand. So in doing so, helping students across the globe, get this level of English where they can feel empowered to speak out about what they disagree with, what they feel is wrong, what they feel needs to change, I think for me it's absolutely vital for them to take their next step into the future. Obviously, I don't think it should replace their own language, but we've seen that English is the language of protest, the language of climate change. You know, it's something that I strongly believe needs to be integrated within all subjects, not English, the climate change, obviously. So I really think that me personally and my fellow TEFLers, as we are, have a huge responsibility in giving this knowledge to people across the globe.
Thank you.
Yeah, I think what we're trying to do is build this idea of learning planets. So basically, we have learning communities that are one-on-one or local communities in the schools, in a classroom. But you know, we can do this at the national scale. We can do this at the global scale. We should be learning from one another. I mean, we have to shift so fast. You know, it's very hard if you have to reinvent the wheel on your own. But if you can learn from others, if you can learn from Wales, if you can learn from India, if you can learn from various places in the world that are advancing so fast, then we can speed up all together. And so we can learn to cooperate. And it means that we have to learn to share the best ways to transform our schools and our learning experience, and the best way to, again, care for oneself, care for others, care for the planet.
In terms of actually scaling to create a learning planet, as you call it, what does that process look like? Is there anything that has been effective in that scaling journey?
So, for instance, January 24, I don't know even if you know, is International Day of Education. What we decided is to create a Learning Planet Festival where everyone for a week can celebrate learning wherever they are and celebrate, the most relevant things they've been learning this year and dreaming of what they want to learn next. And maybe what you want to learn next, your neighbor has learned last. So you can start talking to each other, or you can learn from someone else on the other side of the planet. And of course, you can use digital tools to do this. So among the tools we are building a sort of a GPS of knowledge and learning, and even a GPS of dreams, where you could know where you are in your dreams, and you could see if there are others that could empower you to make your dreams come true. So we're building, both the community and the technology that empowers the individuals and the communities.
I love that phrase, GPS of dreams. That's amazing. In terms of the learning itself under the umbrella, what are the different kinds of learning that we should be aware of and exploring?
That's quite a huge question, to be honest, this umbrella of learning. We need to take into consideration every single learner, every individual learner. The way things are at the moment, it's this kind of blanket approach, this one-size-fits-all of education, and it's something that drives me absolutely crazy. I can't stand it that, we're all learning. I live in Spain, where the education system is even further behind the UK. It's so incredibly outdated. It's rote learning. It's, you go to your classroom, you regurgitate information, and that's it. At the end of the year, you get this list of numbers, and that's your year done. You move on to the next level. So what I like to do, and what I believe is super important, is taking each individual learner into account, how they want to learn, how they need to learn, but then assessing them on that as well. I don't think it's particularly fair to assess every single different learner with this one exam. At the end of the year, they all sit down, they all do this same exam. It's not fair, it's not right. So we need to find a way to educate them the best way that suits them, but also assess them the best way that suits them. For some, that might be a presentation, or that might be I don't know, some form of coursework. Others, maybe it is an exam. But we need to find a way of reaching each of these individual learners. And coming back to something François mentioned, learning from each other. Learning from students in India, learning from students in Brazil, learning from peer-to-peer learning, and not just some bald, bearded guy coming in there telling them what they need to know. That's not really a way of learning. So what I've seen, I work quite closely with a charity, Kids Against Plastic, and they work with empowering youth. And what I've seen from these young people is they learn an awful lot more from each other than they would from, perhaps a teacher going in and telling them what they need to hear, what they need to learn.
I think that they have to learn how to learn, because then they can learn everything else. They have to learn all the soft skills. They have to learn the ability to cooperate, to be compassionate, to be able to do things together that they cannot do alone. They have to learn to face the challenges of today and the challenges of tomorrow. They have to learn to face their personal challenge, and there are many, but also their community challenge and know our global challenges. And they have to learn to do this from one another. And they have to learn to do things that machines cannot do. For instance, computing and memorizing are things that machines do better than us. So that shouldn't be the most important things they are learning. They should be learning things that machines cannot do, but they should be learning to do things with machines that neither the machine nor themselves could do. Okay? So I think they have to learn to create collectives that can face those global challenges. And actually, we don't even know how to do this. So clearly, we cannot teach them these things. We can just empower them to explore these frontiers and to explore those challenges and to learn from each other and to progressively scale local solutions to global solutions.
Well, I'm pleased that you mentioned about challenges, because that's something I'd love to ask about, is what do you think are the specific kind of global challenges that children today are facing, and how can we equip them for it?
Oh, okay. Global challenges, I think first we need to look at the local challenges that we face within our own communities, because within education especially, as I mentioned before, these challenges they're so widespread. Like in Spain, for example, I imagine in Wales things are changing rapidly. So this idea of learning about critical thinking and collaboration, there are lots of buzzwords within the ELT community, within the English language teaching community, that we often talk about, but there's not a lot of action towards that. They often come up in course books. This is all about critical thinking, but then at the end of it, the challenge is the same exam. So we're talking about, we need collaboration, and then at the end of the course, everybody's prepared to go and sit a Cambridge exam because they need to have a B2 level to be able to get a visa to go and live in another country. And I think we need to really look beyond this end goal of being this certificate, within English language learning, and we need to look at creating global citizens. We need to look at creating a way of learning that is inclusive to everybody, not just those who are hoping to get the certificate. In my sector, this goal of being able to fill in the correct gap or listening for the right answer, it's something that is completely useless when it comes to real life. You don't go down to the pub with your mates and say, hey, can you describe this picture for me? It's just not real. So these challenges are to make education ready for the real world, not just for sitting that exam. So I think that the biggest challenge is, as I say, making education real and making it something that's actually useful for the future and not just for this piece of paper.
I think the United Nations report, like the IPCC report on climate change, sets some of this, sustainable development goals. We know all about this, I guess, in this room. But I think there is a report that maybe is not well known enough. It's the WHO, UNICEF, Lancet report on children's health perspective. Basically, what they say is that the life expectancy of children born today is going to be lower than the ones born in our generations. And the reason is climate change, pollution, obesity, addictions, 20th century addictions, and 21st century addictions. And why are there more and more new addictions? Because companies make money by having customers that are addicted to their product, and they try to make them addict as young as possible. Okay? So that's part of the global challenges that we're all facing. But every one of our kids is facing those, and they are, somewhat powerless compared to the power of AI-driven advertisement that leads them to become hyper-consumers, addicted consumers. So we have to teach them to be empowered to understand, the fact that they have to understand their own body, their own brains, their own craving for sugar and fat and so on, and they have to learn to master their own feelings and their own emotions and their own cravings so that they can not be manipulated. And then, so if they learn to care for themselves, they care also for others. Because if you hyper-consume, which is bad for you because you become obese or addicted, it's also bad for others because the price of the good that you're over-consuming is increasing. And it's, of course, bad for the planet because you over-consume the resource. So learning to be a reasonable local human beings contribute to the global challenges together. So that's the sort of things that they have to learn. They have to understand this complexity from their local actions. You know, Aristotle was saying there's three forms of knowledge: episteme and techne, which is science and technology, and phronesis, which is the ethics of action. They have to learn that the ethics of their action has an influence not only on them and to others, but locally and globally, now and in the future. And once they start understanding these things, then they can see, you know, how they can have a positive impact for themselves, for others, and for the planet.
And in your kind of vision for the future, how would education help support that in terms of overcoming or being aware of those challenges?
Well, I think it starts from the daily life. You know, you invite the students, and I think, you know, Kiran will be on stage very soon, and she will give very interesting ways of doing this very precisely. But you invite them to see in their personal life something that bothers them, and you invite them to feel, then imagine a solution, then do something about it, and then share what they've done. And I think they can do this, and we can do this at scale now. We can build the technologies that allow them to know what others have been trying to do and learn from it so that they don't have to reinvent the wheel. They can climb on the shoulders of giants so that they can see further. And they can cooperate not only locally but also globally to change their own life paths and our global humanity life paths.
To truly empower young people, we've talked about youth empowerment today. What does that look like in practice? How can we build strategies to empower young people?
Again, I think this goes down, again, to looking at the individual. You need to know what makes that individual tick. This talk of climate action, you know, we look at SDG 13, climate action, it's such a huge umbrella. You know, it can be absolutely anything, and it can be somewhat intimidating. You know, so you suggest this idea of climate emergency, climate change to an 8-year-old, and you know, it's overwhelming because it's everything. So I think to look to empower somebody, to look to empower, like I look at my daughter, for example. She's almost 9, and you have to look for an area, you know, a passion. You can't just say, right, you know, the ice caps are melting, so what we need to do is change the world. That's not going to work with anybody. It's too much. It's overwhelming. So to help empower students, like of all ages, to be honest, I'm not just talking kids and teenagers. I'm speaking about adults as well. It's help them focus in on that passion. Find that thing that they are passionate about, that they can make a difference, and start within themselves. You know, start making changes within themselves, and then, you know, make changes around them, within their families, within their households, and then maybe within their neighborhoods, and looking at what they can do with certain issues. Not just, you know, let's try and lower global emissions, but, you know, take each individual issue and take it step by step, so they can see the difference they're making, and they can make those differences and see that and grow with that.
Empowerment is a difficult concept in French because we won't even have the word. Okay, so that tells you how much we have to progress. But if you look at history, there is moments of history where empowerment was more present than others. Typically in Athens, you know, when you start building democracy, citizenship, education, science, art, and public debate together, you start building empowerment. But remember, you better be a man then, okay? And a free man rather than a slave or a woman or a child. If you look at the Enlightenment, it's basically the same that benefited from the same package that was invented first at the city level and then at the national level around first the writing technology in Athens and then the printing press during the Enlightenment. And when you arrive to today, you have to go from not only the city and the nation, but to the planet. And you have to empower not only the white male, but everyone, including the children. They are the last non-citizens. So you have to tell them what citizenship is about. And for instance, you know, there is a UN Declaration of Children's Rights. But there is one right they don't have, which is the right to ask for new rights. So what if we give them this right? Okay? Then they start, and it's been done, and when you start doing these things, they start asking for rights for nature. Okay, they are, they've not been to Wales, but they know these things, very intuitively. Okay, so you can empower them to become these first generations of planetizen, of citizens of the planet, not just of their nation states or of their cities. You have to empower them so that they can transform the game, change the game. Okay, the current game is a game that is a lose-lose game. There might be a few winners of the competitions for money and power on the short time scale, but on the long time scale, we'll all lose in this game. So we have to change that global game, and that starts by changing the local game, and changing the local game means being empowered to change the local rules, and then progressively network with others to change the global rules.
Thank you. We've spoken a lot today about young people. The final thing I just wanted to touch on was around teachers and educators. So what can we do to support teachers and educators to help create conscious citizens?
I love that question. Being a teacher, that is like one of the keys. As teachers, we are amplifiers of this message. So we go in and strangely enough, students do actually listen to us sometimes. Not always, but so being able to connect with other educators, something I do at Renewable English, I offer courses to help other educators create a greener mindset within themselves first, but then also within their students. So I think it's absolutely vital that we get in at this level, at the level where teachers can amplify this message and share it with all of their students. But again, we're talking about youth. It's not only the youth students. There are lifelong learners, particularly within the English language sector. So when you get this message to the teachers, they can spread that to the kids. They can spread it to the teenagers, but they can also spread it to the adults and the parents. So this message can be spread throughout. But it's absolutely vital that we get them on board, and we show them that you don't need to be a climate expert to help teach about climate change. It can be piecemeal. It can be bit by bit. We don't have to reinvent our entire syllabus. It can be a routine in your daily classes. You can have 5 minutes for the planet. You can end your class with, let's write a tweet about how today's subject matter would affect the planet. So it's these small ideas, these small changes that we can bring to our teachers can really help empower them, empower their students.
That's it, thank you.
Yeah, I fully agreed. You have to empower them for them to empower their students. And it's very difficult in countries like France that have a very hierarchical structure. And so what we have to create is networks of teachers that can learn from each other about these things. Okay, so the same way the learners should learn from each other, the teachers should learn from each other. And so they have to go away from this vertical domination where, they themselves are being assessed on criteria that are becoming ever more obsolete. Okay, and I think one of the difficult things for teachers is that by definition they were raised like every one of us in the previous system, and they were quite successful at it, and they loved it enough that they wanted to continue this. Okay, but I think that every human beings on the planet progressively, including every teacher, of course, understand the need for change. And they see the struggle, the mental struggle of the kids of today, of the young people of today. And I think they all feel concerned. They will all want to contribute to the change. But we have to empower them and give them the tools and the methods and the energy and the freedom and to unleash their creativity and so that they can unleash the creativity of the young ones. Okay? So we have to build platforms that are very much like Wikipedia, which is an open platform, or GitHub, and there are variations of those platforms. But there's not enough of those platforms that are dedicated to teachers, where teachers can share what they do with each other and can share it with the world and can learn from each other and progressively redesign complete curricula exactly in the way you were saying. Maybe this idea of the tweet, or maybe completely different ideas, and they have to learn from each other all the time. That's what we have to build together, and we have to empower the teachers. Many of them are not geeks, so we have to co-design between the geeks and the teachers and the learners the next generations of platform where artificial intelligence can, with this GPS of knowledge and GPS of dreams, allow them to know where they are and to know where their students are and help them to navigate in this landscape to go from what we know today to what we need to know to become sustainable citizens of the planet.
Fantastic. Harry and François, thank you so much for your time today and sharing your amazing insights about the future of education.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Next up, I'd like to welcome Kiran Sethi into the stage. Kiran Sethi is an Indian designer, educationalist, education reformer, and social entrepreneur. With a degree in visual communication, she ran a flourishing design practice, but it was when her children started going to school that Sethi recognized her true calling, putting design thinking into education. She founded the award-winning Riverside School in Ahmedabad that focuses on empowering children with I Can mindset. She also created the Design for Change program, which is in more than 50 countries. It's for you as well. And children can use the simple design thinking framework to design solutions for some of their greatest challenges. Thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you for having me.
Firstly, I'd love to talk about your route into education. How did you find yourself creating the Riverside School?
Oh, I'm often surprised when I come to these conferences that talk about change. I had no plans of changing the world. I was super happy doing my design practice. And then my whole world changed when I became a mother. And so when my son went to school, I think I witnessed firsthand a system that rewards compliance over conversation, control over creativity. And as a mother, I think I reacted and I said, oh my God, nobody loves my son, this is horrible. But I think as a designer, I responded to the opportunity. I said, what if? There has to be another way where children's voices can be part of the journey. So I took my son out of school that day, and I said, I'll start the school. So I think at that time, I had no plans of changing the system. It was really the simple response to my son's education. And I started the school in my home 21 years ago.
Fantastic. I'm sure our audience would love to know how you actually started a school. So what did that actually look like? You started with one student and it grew?
Actually, it was really interesting. I put an ad in the papers on the 18th of January, 2001. I said, I'm starting the Riverside School. I do have a house. Please come and see this. So on 26th of Jan, 2001, there must have been 15 phone calls. What is this? Who are you? Where are you? So I said, no, I do have a building. I'll show you that. 26th of Jan, 8:45 in the morning, I'm taking these parents to see the school, and an 8-point earthquake hit that very day. So the biggest earthquake that hit happened on the day I was supposed to start my school. So I think the gods were telling me some story. And I think it comes down in a larger sort of way to say, do you really, really want to do this? You know, when an 8-point earthquake hits, it shakes everything that you have. And 3 months down, I remember a lot of the parents left. They chose to leave. The teacher who was going to start the school with me left, not only the city, but the country. And I think I was left with asking myself the question, how much did I want to do this? You know, it could have been so easy to have an excuse. The nature was telling me that this was not going to happen, to also looking at it as a possibility to say, maybe the earth had to change. Maybe something had to move, right? And in June, I opened the doors to 26 children. Several of those parents, I remember telling me, it's close to home. Maybe 1 or 2 years I'll be with you, and then I'll go to a good school. All those children graduated from Riverside much later. So I think it just starts by you really, really, really wanting it. You know, there is no other motivation but you and yourself.
And what does the school look like today?
It is wonderful. I will invite everybody who comes to India to see the Riverside School.
I want to come to
Yes.
your school. I wish I was a child again to come to your school.
I think I will capture it in just one word. After the pandemic, there was this, I have these boys who reach 15, 16, who think they're just too cool for school, right? And I remember when we opened up and we said, okay, we're starting school again, come back. And they all came back. And one of these boys doesn't hug. And I told him he'll only graduate if he hugs me. So he comes, hugs me, and he says, you know, the school feels like a hug. And for me, that pretty much encapsulated everything that the school stands for. Safety and voice and laughter and love. All of these have to permeate the bones of our children, right? Everything else, incidental. Khan Academy is there for that. But if they don't walk into the space and feel the love and feel noticed, what's the point of going to a school? So I think that's really what the school is all about.
It's very beautiful. What do you wish more people understood about the space of education? What would you like to change?
I'm often actually surprised that we're still having conversations about what should we learn about education. You know, I think in the first 2 years of a child's life on the planet, no matter where they are, they go from crawling to sitting, to standing, to running, to laughing and telling everybody, look at me, I can. And then we send them to school. And we tell them, no, no, no. Now for another 15 years, keep quiet. And then we are surprised that our children don't graduate being citizens of the world. So I think the belief systems, and I've seen this universally because of Design for Change, is there are 3 filters that most educators work around. Age, you're too young, not now, maybe when you're 18. Okay, that's the greatest lie we tell children, that one day you will change the world, that you are the future. They're here today. And they've shown us the greatest changes in the first 2 years, and yet we don't believe that. We don't trust them enough, right? The second is gender. In so many parts of the world, gender shapes the choices that our children get. And the third is demographics. Where you're born determines where you will reach. All of these myths have to be challenged. So when you start a school or you are a caregiver or whatever, I think the simple belief system that starts with noticing the power that children have already demonstrated. So this is no rocket science. They're telling us. They're showing us that they can. And I think when we confuse obedience for respect, it all goes downhill. So at a 2-year-old, when they walk into school and you say, obey the rules, obey and be good. Obedience is an act of power, right? It's about control. It is about, I will tell you what to do. And slowly you diminish the child's potential. But respect, oh, that's an active word. It asks of you to lean in. It asks of you to listen. It asks of you to notice and challenge yourself. That's difficult. Most teachers like to go into school and say, oh my God, I can't smile and teach you quadratic equations. I mean, let me choose one. And the easiest thing is to choose is the content, not the content of your character. So I think that's the challenge that we have to ask ourselves daily when we walk into, or are we worthy of being in front of children? You know, you asked Harry about the skills of teachers. And I think the biggest thing I have told teachers is you are a living curriculum. Everything else you teach is incidental. But the way you smile, the way you lean, the way you walk, the way you hug somebody, the way you talk, children are learning what you're not teaching them. That's it. So your role modeling will determine whether they will shift the way they think and they understand themselves.
And it's the teachers we remember, right? It's not the topic.
Absolutely. You'll remember the one who's beaten you, you'll remember the one who's awakened you. But you're going to remember them. The worst is the teachers you don't remember at all. Well, that's such a tragedy. For 15 years you've gone through and there has been no recognition or no registration of that person in your life. What a pity. Right? What a pity. I keep telling the teachers, you should be that teacher that they will write about. Oh, Kiran, ma'am, did this and all of that. I mean, that's the reason you get into this place.
Can you talk to me a little bit about the Design for Change framework, how you created it and what it involves?
Oh, Design for Change is lovely. I want everybody to do it. Well, Design for Change, actually, I'm a designer, right, by education. So I think the idea that you don't design for somebody, but you design with somebody is the governing principle of design thinking, right? You never go in and say, I will impose my solution on you. It's an invitation to the user to be able to understand how the solution empowers or enriches that solution. So at Riverside, we had started using these same principles of empathy, which is the starting with the heart, getting children to understand who they are and identify the world. Ethics, the idea of imagination. What choices will I take to change something? Then the whole idea of do, put that into action. And the fourth step, which is really what I think we don't do enough, is share. We don't share. Especially in education, we think that's the last great idea we will ever have, so let's not get anybody into it. So the share is to be shameless, to be able to share with abundance, to tell somebody, oh, I can do that too. So the framework, feel, imagine, do, share, emerged to demystify design thinking and to offer it to children as an empowerment framework, that this is your story. Go, be amazing. First feel, then imagine, do, and share. So we were seeing it at Riverside. We said, my God, this is awesome. But I think when you're in education, you have a responsibility larger than just the children who come to your school, right? And so in 2009, we took the same framework and reached 30,000 schools in India, right? We offered it as a movement. And I remember our first story came to us from a little corner, from Assam, actually, in the corner, Dimapur. And we started crying. We said, oh, my God, here are children being agents of change, and nobody was noticing them. We didn't see them before. So Design for Change became an opportunity for children to be, to do, and to be noticed, and to share. And they were doing it as young as 3 years old. So that's, again, offering the world an opportunity to see children for who they are and the potential that resides within them. So Design for Change became an opportunity to share that. The framework now is used by, my God, children in over 60 countries. And we have superheroes around the world making the world a better place.
How have you managed to scale it to that kind of global level?
Well, in all fairness, when I did it in India, I didn't think it would go global. And I had the opportunity to speak on TED when it came to India for the first time. And I didn't realize the power of a platform like TED, right? I mean, platforms like this as well, right? Very often when you do something, you're keen that other people kind of see it. But it just went viral. And so what happened was we just put everything open source. We put everything on the platform, and we started getting calls from Taiwan and Peru and Brazil. And that's it. We said, this is yours. Go take it and make it your own. So I think we removed the bureaucracy between intent and action. There were no forms you had to fill up. There was nothing that you had to pay. It was all free and open source. And suddenly, when you give that autonomy to somebody who's taking your idea, they have the accountability to the idea. So just right now gone, and we've got superhero partners across the world doing Design for Change.
How important do you think collaboration is in the education space?
I don't think today we can do it without collaboration. I think fundamentally, the idea that we're still talking the same thing even after 50 years is a shame on us. I think the fact that there has been no real political and collective will to really change the needle. I keep thinking that when COVID happened, and I remember talking to my husband, and he said, no, the vaccine will take 3 years. Hell, we came out with a vaccine in 8 months. So there is that collective will to do something, right? We've had an education pandemic for the longest time. Nobody cared. Where is that ICANN vaccine that we can put into all children, right? So we have to have really, really collective will to be able to move this needle. We can't do this now without it.
And what do you think it would take to bring about that transformational change?
Shamelessness. Shamelessness and stamina and a sense of humor. No. I'm just saying that less talk, more doing. Even if you're, I love the word prototyping because I think design thinking comes naturally. So even if sitting right here, 3 people come up and say, hey, we want to do something, let's just prototype it. Let's just put it out into a small little pilot. Unless you don't prototype it, you cannot refine it and get the feedback. That loop is super important to be able to then scale and say, yeah, this is possible. So I would think that, I think it just has to be pushed into an action rather than great conversations and white papers.
A question I asked on the panel before, but I'd love to hear your thoughts as well, is on empowering teachers. What does that look like in your school and in the way that you work?
Well, a lot of it, I mean, it's already been said about the idea of the same thing that I needed my son for. I mean, the idea of noticing, the idea of leaning in, the idea of saying, I think what you're doing is amazing. We don't do that to teachers enough. We're constantly telling them what they don't know and how less they know, and then blaming the entire human potential. So I think the idea that that caregiver, whether it's a teacher, a parent, or whatever, is in front of a child. I've learned this. Children might not listen to you, but they will always mimic you. So you have to be super worthy of being mimicked. So if we want children to be interested, you have to be interesting. If we want children to be kind, then you have to be kind. So this is not rocket science. You don't need a PhD to smile, right? But we keep telling children, teachers about the content they have to teach and the pedagogy they have to do. But your body is a pedagogy. And we don't often talk about that enough. And our young children, because I keep coming back to the young children, that's where their mindset and their worldview gets created. Who's in front of me? Do I like meeting this person every day in the morning? Will that person greet me, notice me, listen to me? I know what it did to my son. I know exactly, he was one of 60 kids in a class, and the teacher didn't even know his name. She said, when I went to ask her, I asked her, who are my son's friends? She said, what is his roll number? So they become roll numbers. They become statistics of a nation. They don't have a voice. They don't have a name. And you strip them of identity. The same thing is with teachers. With adults, I think every human being wants to be noticed, wants to say, I see you. I think you're amazing. And look in the eyes. We're not doing that anymore because everybody's looking down. We don't see the eyes. So when I think Sophie was talking about the color or the shape of the leaves, I would often ask my children, what's the color of your mama's eyes? They don't know. That's a real pity.
You've had a fascinating journey and career. Could you tell me, what are some of the most impactful kind of moments of your career that you've experienced?
This. Oh. Well, I think that decision of first becoming a mom, I think I had passion, but my purpose was found when I became a mother. So passion for design, I think found purpose in putting design into education. So I think that was a big moment. The earthquake, I mean, it tested me. It asked me whether you really wanted to do this. So I think the earthquake. I think all the ups and downs were meant to be. I wouldn't have wanted any other way because it's either baked me for this purpose and offered me ways to test my skill sets, to question and challenge what I stand for or what we are doing in this space. Yeah, so I think it's been a wonderfully flawed and fabulous journey.
Bracing it all. If you were to have one takeaway for our audience today on something you'd love them to remember about the future of educational learning, what would it be?
There is no future if you don't act today. There is no tomorrow. And if COVID has taught us anything else, the word of being present has never been more important. I know for the last 2 years we have experienced a lot of loss and grief and people who are no longer with us in our rooms. And so there's no longer time to waste. Oh, next Thursday I will do this. So at Riverside we have this word, every today. Not even every day, but every today. Can I leave today a little bit kinder, a little bit more just, a little bit more beautiful? Right? If you do this today, it will be those stepping stones for tomorrow anyway. I think if we keep deferring the promise to tomorrow, to next day, every day we lose is a loss of the opportunity for a child to believe. So there is no tomorrow, my friend. We have only today.
Kiran, you've been the most wonderful guest, and I honestly wish I could go back to school and come to your school. Thank you so much.
Thank you.